Welcome, everybody, to tonight's live learning event with Gray Media. My name is Nicole Karras, and I am a recruiter with Gray Media, joined tonight by Jamie Gray, someone who I've actually known for quite a long time in this industry. It's wild how you move around in television and you re-meet or re-engage with people you met long ago. But one of the things, Jamie, that we've heard time and time again is that story pitching is one of the things that is a skill set that's just really hard to get a firm grasp on no matter where you are in your journey.
Yes, definitely. And coming from being a reporter, starting in college, or I guess we can go back to high school newspaper even, to me, it's the hardest thing to learn how to do well. And then now as a manager, I'm on the other side and I hear pitches. So this is one of my favorite things to talk about. So I was glad to be here.
Well, you're going to teach us tonight some tricks to really add an investigative edge to our story pitches and make your pitch the strongest in the room. There are some tidbits in here that even after being in this business for 20 years that I thought were just a genius way of really simplifying really effective ways to make that pitch all the better in the story pitch meeting and to make those stories stronger. So I'm just going to let you take it away.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us. And it's fun to see where everyone is from and see places that I've worked or places that I've been for stories or for vacation. So it's great to see people from across the country being here. I'll have you go ahead and go to the next slide, Nicole. Nicole is driving for me. Just wanted to give you a little bit of background about me and how I ended up as the director of investigations here with Gray Media's InvestigateTV. There are a lot of different pathways to get into investigations, and there's not really a correct one. This is how I did it. So first of all, I got a journalism degree. I went to the University of Missouri, which is actually how I know Nicole. And I got a degree specifically in journalism and broadcast reporting and anchoring. From there, I was a general assignment MMJ reporter in Waterloo. And then after being in Waterloo for just a little bit, I ended up going out and taking a bureau job in Dubuque, Iowa for the same station. I really enjoyed that job. I had an office inside of the local newspaper building, actually. So that was a lot of fun. We did a lot of convergence journalism before that was really a buzzword, where we would collaborate on various stories. And a lot of people have questions about bureau reporter jobs and if they'll like it or if they won't. So if you ever are interested in a bureau job and would like that perspective, you can email me. I'll have my email at the end of this. And then I was a general assignment reporter in Boise, Idaho. I did work with a video journalist there. After a while being there, I was promoted to investigative reporter there. And there I kind of reinvigorated our station's investigative brand and did a lot of local investigative reporting, but I was also still a general assignment reporter. So I was still going out you can see a photo of me there out at a fire. So I was still going out and doing the breaking news and going to city council meetings and sometimes covering sports news events, things like that. But then I was also doing investigations. And I will tell you, that is probably the best way to get into investigations. I know I said there was no right way to get into investigations, but I think it's a great pathway to go from general assignment and just starting to do more investigative rather than jumping all the way in. A lot of my story ideas I got were because I was also general assignment reporting. That being said, just because you don't have investigator in your title does not mean that you aren't one. And that's sort of my goal today, is to show you ways to be an investigator no matter what your job title is. And it doesn't matter if you're a reporter or an anchor, a digital producer, a student, you can do all of the things that I'm going to show you today. From there, I went to Columbia, Missouri. I actually went back to the University of Missouri and I taught journalism there. I got a master's degree in education while I was there. And then I was also the managing editor and chief investigator for KOMU, which is the NBC affiliate owned by the University of Missouri. From there, I came to InvestigateTV. That was about 7 years ago now. Started as a producer, then I was executive producer, managing editor, and now I am actually director of investigations, effective a couple of months ago. And we do national stories, and you'll actually see a couple of examples from our national team today. But the stories that I will show you are also things you could do on the local level as well. So we're going to talk about, kind of got it split up into 3 parts. We've got some of my tips, and then I'll show you an example, and then we'll kind of play around with the concept live while we're here and see if we can put my tips into action right away so that you can have stronger story pitches. So we're going to talk about finding investigative ideas, probably the hardest part, doing in-depth reporting on deadline using investigative techniques, and then just some of my other quick tips and tricks for when you are trying to find a story idea, especially let's say you're driving to work to the story meeting and you need 3 story ideas and you have somewhere between 0 and 1 of them ready. So first we will talk about finding investigative story ideas, finding your own investigations. I always kind of like to just take a step back for all of us. And I think about this in my work today, and I've always kind of thought about this. One of the best parts about being a journalist is that we have access and a platform to ask the questions that everyone has, but we can go talk to the mayor. We can go talk to the city council. We have time to go spend an hour digging into something that anyone in our community would be curious about. So you're an investigator because you are a person who lives, insert your city, because you are a person who lives in Madison, because you are a person who lives in Montgomery, Augusta, State College, any of these places. So when I think about investigations, it doesn't need to be everything that I've seen on 60 Minutes, let's say, or a Dateline episode. The things that you investigate typically are the things that are in your everyday life that everyone else in your community is experiencing and also has the same questions. So I say change your mindset. When you are just out in the world living your normal life and you see something that strikes you as strange, alarming, questionable, write it down, make a note of it in your phone, have a voice memo, and then start to think about how you might look into that. Pretty much anything that you have a question about can actually be, quote, investigated. One thing that I like to do and that I encourage people to do, especially if you're just starting out with investigating, is that when you have a question or a claim, and sometimes a claim might come from a viewer tip, let's say, write those things down and then start to kind of sketch out how you might be able to prove or disprove those claims or answer those questions through people and documents. One thing that I kind of compare this to is if you've ever sat in a trial or if you've seen like a crime procedural on TV, what the attorneys are doing is they are taking evidence, photographs, videos, documents, phone call recordings, and they are taking those things and then they are taking witnesses and introducing all of that evidence to a jury by using the people to showcase the evidence. In a lot of ways, when you're doing an investigative report, you're kind of trying to do the same thing. You're trying to take all of the photographs, the videos, the documents, and explain them to viewers, the jury, who's there to listen to a question and make their own opinion about what they're seeing. And then you have the people that explain your evidence. So if you kind of approach your investigations in the way that you're an attorney building a case to show a jury, it's one way that you can kind of structure it in your mind and think through an investigation. I always like to say too, though, not everything is nefarious. Sometimes things go wrong, and maybe it's a failure of an institution. Maybe it's a failure of a system. Maybe there isn't enough money. Maybe a terrible set of coincidences all happened at the very same time and something strange happened, right? There are all kinds of reasons that something might happen, but they are still worth looking into. I'll tell you, a lot of the investigations that I've done over the years, when you think, okay, this public official has done something terrible, they really dropped the ball here. When you actually go and talk to that person and you go through the budget with them, they might say, yeah, I've wanted to fix this for 20 years, but we only have $2,000 in our budget and this thing would cost $10,000. So sometimes when you approach people with all of these questions and with the evidence that you've gathered, there can be different reasons for why things are happening. But again, those things are still worth questioning. I just caution people, especially if you are like just getting into investigative, to look at things through the lens of there could be different reasons for why something is happening, and it may not be the first thing that you're presented with. So keep an open mind and check things out. I want to show you an example of an investigation from our team. This is our reporter, Carice Jackman, who worked with Daniela Molina and others on our team to look into America's lead crisis. So obviously, when the water crisis in Flint happened, that really put the spotlight on the dangers of having lead in water lines, right? So Carice actually was a reporter in Flint then, and she's kind of continued to be interested in this. And so she started looking at this mandate to replace all of the lead pipes in America. And she's done a few different reports on this, both for broadcast and for online. And looking at this mandate to replace all of the lead lines in America within 10 years. But to take that story a little bit farther, what she did is look at the deadlines that all of the water utilities across America have to meet in order for this process to sort of go forward. In doing that, she found that there were some issues with getting even step one finished, which is the lead line inventory. And so we'll show you a few minute story that she did about that issue, and then we'll talk a little bit about how that kind of works in with what we just talked about.
Hello, how are you? Good afternoon. My name is Danielle Crouch. I'm with DC Water.
Handing out flyers.
DC Water.
Leaving messages. It's not a political campaign these volunteers across Washington, D.C. are canvassing for.
Okay. And at this time, DC Water is offering a lead-free program to have your service line replaced for free.
But rather a push to get the lead out of all pipes in our nation's capital. The same mission in place across America.
So when you start to think about drinking water in this area, we service about 700,000 residents in the District of Columbia.
Kirsten Williams is with DC Water, a utility company covering DC, parts of Maryland, and Northern Virginia.
So just this past year, we have knocked on over 24,000 doors to educate them about our lead-free DC program.
In the 10-year plan to get the lead out, fall 2024 marked a big milestone. Water systems nationwide had an October 16th deadline to submit their initial lead inventory numbers to their states. We found some states like Massachusetts reported that they received 99% of their water systems inventories. But we also found states where hundreds of water departments missed that deadline. In Virginia, for example, around 300 water systems out of more than 1,500 did not turn in their inventories on time. In Georgia, over 400 out of more than 1,900 water systems did not meet that deadline either.
So how did our water systems get to this point? To understand how we got here, you have to go back in time when the lead industry promoted the use of lead pipes, despite there being complaints and major concerns about the use of lead pipes on a person's health.
Public health researcher Richard Raven has been documenting the lead industry's history for more than 30 years. Combing through a large box of lead industry records, he showed our team the messaging used by companies dating back a century. Raven says to downplay the dangers, the Lead Industries Association sent workers around the country to promote the use of lead, using ads like these in newspapers and magazines.
I became extremely upset, you might say, that they were selling their product at the expense of the health of children and adults.
And now crews are left digging for lead-laced answers laid beneath homes and streets across America. But unknown water lines and sometimes wrong historical data are the challenges several water departments are facing across the country as they try to identify the number and location of their lead service lines, uncovering more lead pipes than they originally anticipated. But now there could be a futuristic solution to 100-year-old rickety record keeping. To right the wrongs of the past, Blue Conduit, a water analytics company based out of Ann Arbor, Michigan, is using artificial intelligence to help predict where lead might be, using things like historical documents.
And so when we look at other service lines where we know all of those pieces of information except the material, we can then make a prediction, a best guess. What's the likelihood? that this address has a lead pipe.
It's a tactic DC Water is using too, taking advantage of groundbreaking technology and community engagement, utilizing every resource possible to get the lead out of one of the nation's oldest cities, making the water lines for homeowners safer, one block at a time.
So here's one kind of formula that you might use to take something you're interested in to an investigative idea. I like to think of this from a noun to an investigation, and a noun is not a story pitch. You need some type of question that you're going to answer. So in the case of what we just watched, I would say that perhaps the noun, if you're interested, would be maybe drinking water. Or it might be lead poisoned drinking water. From there, then you would start to think about like what kind of documents might be out there. In this case, we knew that there was a lead line inventory that was going to happen. And in fact, Crease did a story ahead of the deadline talking about that. After the deadline passed, she requested the lead line inventories from the states because everyone was supposed to send them in. Well, when she requested those, we found out that a number of municipalities had missed that deadline. So right there, we knew that there was an investigation that we could pursue. The question there being how many of the states and how many of the municipalities had actually met that deadline. And so we were able to answer that question. But to take it a little bit more in depth, we looked at that question from what we were just discussing, which is the why. Why'd they miss this deadline? And what was interesting and what she found is the record keeping was so bad that the inventories became very challenging. And in fact, if you watch a longer version of this story, she went out with DC Water and saw when they would dig down in a place where they thought there was going to be lead pipe, it would turn out to be copper. So then they, would have to go in and do another test pit, and it was costly and it was time consuming. And so we started to see why states and municipalities were missing this, kind of step one deadline. On top of that, she was able to kind of dig into the history of lead lines in America, why they're not documented super well, why they are in a lot of different places, kind of the history of the industry, if you will. So I'm going to give you a few examples of kind of like walking around in the world. You see a thing, you're like, I wonder if I could investigate said thing. And then you kind of can start to write down, like I was saying, like write the thing down, the claim, the question, start to think about what documents, what sources you might be able to get. So let's say you're interested in school cafeterias. What kind of documents exist about school cafeterias? Well, there are health inspections about school cafeterias. So I might now have the question, how clean are our school cafeterias? And I could get the documentation from my city or county health department and find out, what were the results of the cafeteria inspections. I'll tell you, I had a student reporter pursue this very story one time and actually found out that due to some understaffing, the county where we were was actually not inspecting school cafeterias on the schedule that they were supposed to be inspecting. And so she ended up with this story about how staffing was contributing to a lack of cafeteria inspections in the local school district. Let's say you are driving downtown and you notice there's a downtown paid parking lot. There's probably records associated with that. Well, if you don't pay, there's a ticket. Can you get a ticket database from the city to see how many outstanding tickets there are? So there have been lots of people that have done stories like this, and you can find out how much money is owed to the city in unpaid parking tickets, money that could be used for things by the city, right? Let's say you're getting your nails done. What kind of records exist for a nail salon? Health inspections again. So you could pull all of the health inspections from all of the nail salons in your area and see how often are they inspected in my state? Are the results of those inspections public in my state, or are they kept a secret? And that in itself might be a story. Snowplow, which became relevant to like everyone on this list at this point. Normally there's half the country that I leave out if I start talking about some type of weather phenomena, but yeah, all the way to Florida this week. So snowplows. Snowplows hit people's cars sometimes. So could I get the city vehicle insurance payouts, which would also possibly include fire trucks, police cars, garbage trucks, the snow plows. Get those records and find out how often do city vehicles have accidents, and then how much do those accidents cost taxpayers via having to pay these out. So, excuse me. So next we're going to kind of practice. So in the chat, please, if you could, just name a place that you went or something that you did this week. It can be super generic. We don't need a whole story, like a few words. Somewhere you went or something that you did this week, and we're just going to kind of riff on that idea. So as I wait for a couple of things in the chat, I'll give you an example of kind of this noun to question formula that I used one day when I was on my way to work and didn't have a story idea. I was driving to work and it was raining, and I noticed that I was not able to see the lines on the street. Like, it was just as though it was just all blacktop and I was driving, couldn't see the lines. And I thought, well, that's strange, and I don't really remember this being a problem before. So I thought, I wonder if there's something to this. As soon as I got to work, I called the Department of Transportation and I asked, and it turned out at the time, this was years ago, that there was a road paint shortage. And so they were having to mix road paint in with like regular paint that you might paint a building with. And it was wearing off more quickly than road paint, and it didn't have all of the reflective qualities to it. So I was able to day turn a story about how this road paint shortage was affecting drivers, particularly when it was raining or when it was dark outside. All of that just from driving. All right, so we've got, all right, I'm just going to pick a few of these and I will talk about a few ideas that I have here. Okay, grocery store. So this is interesting. Did you know that the scales at the grocery store, like where you might weigh a bag of apples or where they measure out a pound of turkey at the deli, there are inspectors that go in and inspect all of the scales in the grocery store to make sure that when you pay for a pound of turkey, you're actually getting a pound of turkey. So you could actually pull the weights and measures inspections for your local grocery store. Local pizza place, again, restaurant inspections. The thing about being in the United States is most of our buildings are inspected for something. A college campus. Okay, I'm going to go back to my inspections again. So with that, the fire department goes in and does fire inspections for public buildings, especially at schools. You can get copies of the records for fire inspections and see any of the deficiencies that the buildings might have. In one iteration of that story, I found kind of the same deficiencies over and over, and it came down to money. The schools didn't have enough money to replace some of the fire safety equipment. A lot of these you could kind of do the public health inspection stuff. Racetrack. I don't know if it's horse race. I'm gonna assume horse race track. I'll do NASCAR too. So if it's a horse race track, you can pull records of injuries that have happened to horses at horse race tracks. If it's a NASCAR track, or we'll say any sort of stadium, an interesting story that you might be able to pursue is looking at the concession stand health inspections. People have done that on college campuses, like for your big college football stadium, those types of places. Gas station, weights and measures also goes and checks to make sure that a gallon of gas, when you pay for 1 gallon of gas, that it's actually dispensing a gallon of gas. So there's another story idea for you. Hopefully this makes sense. It's really a mindset shift. Once you start to see that, it really kind of changes the way that you look at the world. And I'm sorry if I'm ruining the world for you a little bit, because you will look and see like story ideas as you look at things. But it's just sort of looking around and like look for labels on things. So the reason I know about a lot of these things is by reading the weird stuff that most people don't read. Like on the gas pump, there will be a sticker that says like inspected by the Missouri Department of Agriculture or whatever. So that's how I know where to go look for those records. All right, hopefully we got a few story ideas there. All right, investigating on a deadline. Gonna kind of talk about investigating breaking news scenarios. And this could also include like weather events, those types of things. So that's a picture of me out on a wildfire scene in Idaho a long time ago. So some key questions to think about when you are covering breaking news or a natural disaster is, how can you find more information right now? Like, what can I get on my cell phone? What could somebody back in my newsroom help me with? What can I find on the internet that already exists? And some of that is kind of figuring out in advance what types of records are out there. For example, if you were covering a plane crash, the FAA and the NTSB have a tremendous amount of data online where you can look up plane crashes that have happened at your airport recently and what the results of those were and why it happened and those types of things. So what kind of data already exists? Also think about, during breaking news, there are a lot of uncertainties, right? So think through, what do people want to know right now? And sometimes we don't have the answer right then, and that's okay. Sometimes you can say, we have this question, we're working to get some answers on it, but acknowledge the question that's there. This is where I, again, encourage you to think like anyone else in your community might. Also, look at social media. What are people actually asking about the breaking news situation as it's happening? And can you get answers for them? I think one of the reasons that it's good to start thinking like an investigator when you're covering breaking news is that we report on a lot of really scary stuff. And there is a, I think, justified criticism of the news media for sometimes scaring people too much. And information is power. And the more context we can give to people, especially when something really scary is happening, where someone's family is in danger, they're wondering, is my house going to be okay? The more that we can give people, our viewers, context, information, what we're trying to find out for them, and let them know that, I think it can help people understand what's happening more and feel a sense of calmness, even in a chaotic situation. So I take kind of this part of what we're able to do as journalists very seriously, because of the fear that just does exist naturally, especially during breaking news and especially during natural disasters, which, looking at the list of where people are from right now, I know a lot of people have recently gone through all kinds of natural disasters, and I think there's a lot of investigating that can be done. We are going to look at an example of a breaking news investigation that our team did. This was a day turn investigation. So a large majority of our team is actually based in New Orleans. And so then, of course, on New Year's Day, there was the terrorist attack on Bourbon Street, where the man drove his car, his large truck, onto Bourbon Street and hit and killed a number of people on Bourbon Street. Pretty immediately, a lot of people were asking, why did this happen? How did this happen? And first, let's set aside, this was a terrorist who wanted to cause a great deal of harm. So the why is because there was a terrorist, right? But beyond that, people wanted to know, what was the security plan on Bourbon Street? What kind of barriers, what kind of barricades were there? What wasn't there? And we were able to dig in pretty quickly to find out that the bollard system on Bourbon Street was being repaired at the time, and so was not functioning. We were able to find some public records and look at kind of how long this had been talked about, who knew different things, and who had been questioning the system, the security system on Bourbon Street for a while. So we'll go ahead and play this example for you.
Broken barriers, unprotected sidewalks, tourists from around the world. Bourbon Street was an attractive target for a terrorist, and records show the city of New Orleans knew that for years. Now, the sidewalks of the French Quarter are protected by these Archer barriers. How did the city deploy these so quickly? Because New Orleans already had them, though the NOPD superintendent says she didn't know they even existed until the attack.
Actually, we have them. I didn't know about them, but we have them. And so we have been able now to put them out.
The Archer barriers were deployed for major events like Mardi Gras over the years, but not for this New Year's and Sugar Bowl. Test video shows the movable devices can effectively stop a truck in its tracks. Now they're in place on the sidewalk where the terrorists drove around the patrol car, blocking the street. On New Year's Day, bollards installed years ago were missing, and a backup wedge barrier wasn't raised. We've learned the bollards were installed in 2017 and cost $60,000 per set, according to a French Quarter Management District commissioner who said the bollards started failing within 6 months. Records show the commission has talked about pedestrian safety and bollards for years. In fact, the commission recommended bollard repair in 2019 after a security assessment, but the city did not put out bids for the replacement of the broken bollards until 2024. That work is still underway. There's no question there's one person responsible. It's the terrorist. But when you look at the fact that these bollards stopped functioning shortly after they were installed, and then there was a delay in replacing them, is that a concern?
Oh, absolutely.
Louisiana Lieutenant Governor Billy Nungesser had already proposed that the state take over maintenance of the French Quarter from the city before the attack.
You wouldn't have stopped it anywhere. But it just seems like had we had some of these things in place, it would have minimized the damage and loss of life.
There seems to have been a priority to remove the old bollards before there was a plan to replace them with new ones.
Absolutely.
The lieutenant governor and others are promising major reforms.
Some of the poles that could be installed on the sidewalk should be installed permanently. Permanently. In other cities, you walk around planters and different things to deter a vehicle from harming people. Cement planters.
Immediate changes are already visible on Bourbon Street, with more on the way.
So that story, so the attack happened early Wednesday morning. Brendan got to New Orleans Thursday morning, did one story on kind of the bollards and the repairs on Thursday, and that story that you just watched was on Friday. So it's like 48, like 2.5 days later. And like those records from the French Quarter were things that we were able to find online by doing some Google searching, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. But pretty quickly, we were able to ask some of the questions that, quite honestly, on social media, a lot of people had. And then you saw a clip with the police commissioner utilize what the daily reporters are also gathering and what your coworkers are also gathering. So that particular soundbite came from a morning news conference. And by talking to one of the reporters that had been there, we knew that this had been discussed. And so we were able to kind of pull that and ask some more questions and kind of pull that thread a little bit throughout the day. And of course, there are lots of questions and you have to see what you can find out and move from there. These are just some of the key questions that you might kind of think about after breaking news or even kind of as it's going on if it's a multi-day event, let's say. Who are the victims and who are they talking to? Are they filing, or it could be victims' family members as well. Are people filing with insurance? Are they filing police reports? Who are they going to? And if you're in a community, are people gathering in a certain place? Are they going and talking to people that are all at a church? Where are people going and how might you ask them some questions, or quite frankly, ask them what questions they have? Think about who stands to gain or lose from an event. That sounds like kind of a strange question, right? But in certain scenarios, I would not use the last example as one of these, but for example, in a hurricane, who might stand to gain in a hurricane? Well, people that come in and make repairs, right? We see lots of scams that happen after a hurricane, whether it's like fraudster roofers who are not actually going to fix your roof, but they're going to take your money and run. We see lots of news releases that come out for fake GoFundMe accounts, right? All kinds of things happen after there is some sort of tragedy where someone may be benefiting in a scammy way, right? So think about those things. Did someone drop the ball? Could someone have done better? That's kind of our accountability question, right? Is there something that could have been in place? Is there a plan that could have been in place? Could the response have been faster? Start asking those questions. It's not always a story, but those are good questions to start thinking through. And then start thinking through who has records related to the incident. So for example, if there is a fire at an apartment building, first question I have, I want to see all of the fire inspection reports on this particular apartment building for the last 5 years, to see if there was already something that had been identified and maybe the building owner knew that there was some sort of faulty equipment in the building, something like that. Like my mind immediately when I see an apartment or a condo or like a multifamily fire, that's the first thing I immediately think about. So we're going to do another like chat in the practice in the chat. So if you could type into the chat a breaking news scenario that you might cover, like it can be very broad. It doesn't need to be something super specific. And I think the chat lags a little bit. So I'm just going to talk about a couple examples while I wait for a few things to go in. School shooting. So some things that you might look at after a school shooting. Can you find anything about any sort of security implementation that the school has maybe requested before? Can you find out anything about the criminal history of the suspect? Can you talk to the police about anything that they might have known beforehand? Can you pull the 911 logs from the school to see if maybe there had been any incidents prior where police had been called to the school? Those types of things. A train crash. So with trains, there is a ton of data from the Federal Railroad Association where you can go and check out all kinds of train incidents that have happened over the years. Has there ever been anything like this before? I think that's a good context question to ask, especially when we're talking about aviation crashes, train derailments, those types of things. Put it in context. Is this really rare? Or has this happened several times in the same location? A wrong way crash, kind of the same thing. Sometimes if there's a series of crashes that all happen in the same intersection, at the same turn on the highway, at the same section of guardrail, that might be a place where you would want to dig into and see if you can find that. Sometimes you can get that from the Department of Transportation if you're looking on the highways, or if you have like a county roads department, or the police or state police you can perhaps look at. Let's see. Nursing home abuse. So the CMS, Center for Medicaid Services, Medicare Services, has what's called the Nursing Home Compare tool. You can go there and you can see all of the previous nursing home inspections that have been done at facilities across the country. So if there was some type of nursing home that I was looking into, my first stop would be to go to the CMS Nursing Home Compare tool and see if there had been any sort of history of incidents at that same facility. So all of those things you can pretty quickly, a lot of this stuff kind of already exists online. Sometimes you might have to make a records request, and sometimes during breaking news, agencies will expedite those records requests for you because they understand that you're trying to work on something that's for the community to give context at that exact moment. So sometimes you can get records a little bit more quickly if they understand what you're trying to do, and local government agencies might work with you to get something in your hands faster than normal. All right. A few quick tips and tricks. So I always say there's some stuff you can do today, like what we just talked about. Then there are a lot of things that you can do for yourself tomorrow. some of these things are things that I thank past Jamie for. If I thought to plan a little bit earlier, I think that was a really good move that Jamie of 1 year ago made to make my life better today. So think of it in that way. First of all, add some very targeted web searches to your everyday pitches. My biggest tip is probably this. Use Google Advanced Search. There are so many different tools, but one of my favorites is anything that you're searching for on Google. Let's say that you only want government data on railroad derailments. If you type in railroad derailment and then actually type site, like site:/.gov, all of the results that will return to you are only going to come from government websites. So it's a faster way a lot of times, especially during breaking news. If you know that you're just trying to find some government data, if you just simply add that to your search, it'll return much better results for you. And you'll be able to do your research a lot faster. Same with EDU. So like, let's say you wanted to find a study on a topic, then I might kind of flip that and use the site:/.edu. Remember that your daily stories can often turn into bigger stories later. And I don't just mean breaking news. I mean, just like a run-of-the-mill city council meeting that you've attended could be something interesting to look into later, or the signing of a bill. I think it's a good idea to write down like a few word slug of all of the stories that you do. I used to do this just like in my paper calendar. You could do it in your phone. You could do it on a Post-it note. You could put it on your computer. Just write down a few words on what story you cover every single day. And then if you're like going to a story meeting and you need a story idea, look back like 1 month ago, what'd you do? Look back 6 months ago, what'd you do? Is there any sort of follow-up that you might be able to do on a generic daily story that you did back then? I would also say to set calendar reminders for yourself for check-ins on things like new laws and strategic plans. So let's say that there is a new law signed that, well, here we just finally got in Missouri a no texting law. So I believe we're the last state, I think. So I might say, you know, when that got signed, a year from now, I'm going to go check and see how many citations there have been in my city, in my county, in my viewing area since the law went into effect. So that might be an interesting story to do a year from now. I would also say a lot of laws get signed and people are maybe excited about them being signed, and then they may not get funding. So sometimes you'll do a story on a law that is passed and maybe it's named after someone and it's a very big deal to your community. And then a year later, it turns out that perhaps no one was seated on the commission, or that the law didn't get enough funding to actually be effective. So if you set those reminders for yourself, it's always a great way to check in on those types of stories. Get to know your sources now. When there's a fire is not the best time to make yourself known to the fire chief. It's a good idea, especially when you go to a new place, to a new market, to ask if you can come take a tour of the office. And you can say, hey, could I come by for an hour and get a tour of the prosecutor's office? I'd really like to know how you all do things here. If you could help explain to me how a complaint gets filed and where I would be able to get those records, and tell me about all of the different divisions that you have in your prosecutor's office. You can find a lot of story ideas that way, but then you also know who to call when there is something urgent and you've made a personal connection to that person. Also, there are certain things that you can gather every year. A lot of newspapers do this, like every year, get all of the salary data from the city. So find out like all of the positions and how much money everybody made. Those things might become important to you later if you need to look for names of people who are employed by the city, need to find out how much money they make, all of those things. If you make a habit of getting things that you know always exist and keeping those, it makes your life a lot easier when you have a story pitch or breaking news, those types of things. To talk about elevating your everyday. So lots of times I hear story pitches, and I'm sure that I have made story pitches that are sort of just like an event. I received this press release, and it might be an interesting story, don't get me wrong, but there might be like this much more that you can do to make it a big story, to make it a lead story, to make that news release about that community event or what that organization is doing sing even more. And it might make the story a lot more impactful if your viewers understand how important these things are. These are just some examples. So if there's a mobile book fair, you could go out and maybe do a story on the bus that comes and the kids can go on and pick out a book, and that's a story. It's kind of a short story. But what if you made that story about like the retention of reading skills for students over the summer? So I might type into Google summer reading retention study, cite:/.edu. So there's that trick I just told you about. And then I found a study, and I would want to like look into who did the study. And it's very important to understand that you've got a legitimate source when you're looking for things, of course, but the students can lose as much as 20% of learning over summer. So it's important for students to keep up with their reading over the summer. So now you have a mobile book fair that you can frame this story around, but you could do a whole story on why it's important for students to read over the summer. New funds for EV charging expansion. This is happening across the country right now. I saw a news release in Kansas about this. So then I thought, well, I wonder if there's more data about EVs in Kansas to kind of like understand scope here. So you could Google Kansas EV data, cite:/.gov. And then I found a data set of the number of electric vehicles that are registered in the state. So then I might be able to look at kind of the ratio between how many people drive electric vehicles in the state versus how many chargers there currently are and how many they're proposing to add. That just kind of like beefs that story up just this much, and it takes 10 minutes extra to find that, more than that to understand it all, of course, but just like this little tiny bit more. Friday night football kicks off this week. So let's say high school football is starting this Friday night, and you pitch that as a story. Again, it's a story, it's a short story, maybe a feature story. But what if you looked into what are the athletic trainer requirements in my state? And what are they in the states around us? Are they different? And can I do a story on where we stack up for safety requirements on the field? Is it different for different sports? Lots of different stories you could do there. Let's say you see in the newspaper website that there's a police job fair today. You could go do that story, or you could look at job openings in other cities. How much do other cities pay compared to what your city pays? If you have salary information, you could maybe find out how much overtime police officers are working right now to maybe fill a gap and how much money that costs. If there's a medical facility closing, that is important to the community, but to get an idea of how important, you might look into where there are already shortages in providers. And there's lots of government data about this. And you can find out like this medical facility is closing in an area where they're already short on 12 primary care providers. And that immediately just takes that story and ratchets it up just a little bit. I'm going to watch one more example. This one is called Student Bet. It's in collaboration with the Arnold Center for Investigative Journalism at Indiana University. This is kind of framed around sports betting. So sports betting is being legalized in states across the country. So you could pitch doing a story about sports betting being legal or going on the ballot in your state. But in this case, our reporter Josie Sturman, along with a number of student reporters and others from our team, did a story on sports betting and college students. So we'll play that for you now.
From Selection Sunday to opening day.
Let's go, Cardinals!
Whether you're watching athletes on ice or running routes, there's no doubt Americans are invested in sports. But for many, the game is just a little sweeter when there's money on the line. A recent study from the American Gaming Association says last year, U.S. fans legally bet more than $85 billion on sports. But that's not where it ends. The AGA estimates Americans spent another $63 billion on a big gamble, illegal sports betting.
I think that the illegal market is a concern for all of us.
It's a major concern for AGA's president and CEO, Bill Miller, because much of that money goes to unregulated sports books and offshore betting websites that offer none of the protections of legal sports gambling that's allowed in 36 states and D.C.
The offshore illegal websites don't care about age. They don't care about financial means. And so it's more than frustrating.
It can be dangerous, especially because underage kids are among those finding a way to gamble underground using offshore websites. We discovered high school and college students using sports books with questionable odds from offshore sites based in places like Antigua and Europe. Their web addresses end in AG or EU. Some we found specifically target their schools. Bets are placed through a network where students, friends, and acquaintances serve as the bookies and agents who recruit underage bettors, then handle the wagers and payments. Silent backers often pay subscriptions for the offshore sites and hand out access codes when needed. They front the money to cover the book when people win and often allow bets on credit when they don't. Kids can win big, but they can also go bust.
I didn't think of losing.
That quickly changed for this Indiana student who asked us not to reveal his name. He says he began sports betting as a sophomore in high school through an illegal book a friend brought him into. They were allowed to bet on credit after losing a big payout.
So yeah, we went from going up $1,000 the first week. We ended up going down double that amount. Kind of a knife in the chest because it was tough to lose that much money. This would be my free play balance if I were betting on the site.
While he's now old enough to legally gamble, he showed us a few popular offshore sites used by many underage students at the university.
But it's hard to go after.
Dina Titus, the Democratic co-chair of the Congressional Gaming Caucus, wants the Department of Justice to have more tools in the fight against offshore sites.
Now, it's not just my concern, but the industry itself is concerned.
It's difficult to work this type of investigations because they are operating legally a lot of times in their own jurisdiction. Having said that, we've had some successes.
The introduction of legalized operators has certainly changed the scope of the threat, but in no way do we feel like we've been behind the threat or we're still catching up.
Instead, they say the FBI is trying to get ahead by educating the public about the dangers associated with offshore sites. No one knows that better than the Indiana student who showed us how kids who can't legally bet are able to game the system through offshore sites that put them at risk.
I think we'll skip the next practice one, Nicole, because we kind of hit on a few different ones of those in our last one. But there's my email address should you want to contact me. That is the best way to get a hold of me. Haley Ryan, yes, I think you did work on that story. I was wondering if we would have any Indiana people in here. Good to see you, Haley. And I'm fine to take questions as well if you have any for the chat. And I know Nicole's got a couple things too.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to say that some of those graphs that you threw up there, I hope that y'all took a screenshot of those because I think that's a great reference point to think, you know, how many times do you walk into a story meeting and, you know, you've got a peg, you've got a today angle, but that's as far as it goes. It's so surface level. And these are just great tips, I think, to really make sure that you are pitching something really meaningful and can really dig into those stories.
Yeah, and I mean, it takes practice too. And I will say too, another great way to start kind of shifting the mindset a little bit is I like to look at what other people are doing. And especially when I was first starting out, I would go look at some of the large market newspapers and TV stations and see what they were doing, not to copy the investigation, but I was always looking for the line in the story. There's always a line in there that kind of says where they got the information. Like we filed records requests with whoever. And that might give me an idea where I live that I'm going to go file a similar records request. It doesn't mean I'm going to do the same story. In fact, almost never is it the exact same story. Like a lot of the things that we talked about here, you're not going to find the same thing that I found when I worked in Idaho. You're going to find something different, but it might still be a story.
I remember you did one too, or I've talked about this in presentations I've seen before about even elevator inspection records. That, you know, how many of us use an elevator daily or with any kind of frequency? There are records on elevator inspections. And it's funny how, as journalists, we're taught to question the world around us in a healthy way, but to question the world around us and never have our blinders closed. Always be kind of looking around and questioning things and how that can lead to a really great story.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, it's just like because I live here, I am interested, and that's true. And I hope that's what most journalists think. And that's what drives what we do. You know, certainly people have asked me, like, why are you investigating this? And I've truthfully been able to say I was really interested in it. And when I was driving by this building earlier this week, I just noticed this thing. And so I was interested. And it's true. You know, most of the things that I'm investigating are things that I'm interested in, or that, you know, I've seen a lot of viewers that are interested in as well.
Gray has really taken a really great kind of stance and initiative on investigative journalism, just acknowledging how important it is, not only to our industry, but mostly for our viewers' benefit as well. It's truly a public service that we as journalists are able to provide to ask questions. And so we really appreciate you, Jamie, for joining us and sharing your expertise on behalf of Investigate TV and the team that you work with. You're doing a great job. And we just are really, you know, grateful to have you as part of Gray Media. I do want to bring up an event that we will be putting out there next month. If you're interested in joining us, it's not so much a live learning event, but more of an exploratory mission with our friends in Alaska. So we're going to do a market spotlight, a career spotlight on KTUU, which is Alaska's news source, our station in Anchorage, which also has a bureau in Fairbanks. It really is a very fascinating place to live, work, and play. And no guarantees that you're going to have a run-in with a grizzly bear like the reporter in the bottom right, though I have been assured by his news director that no reporters nor photogs were harmed in the snapping of that photo. But we're going to have a couple of news managers from the newsroom, chief meteorologist there, someone from the sales team. We're just going to have some representatives from our newsroom in Alaska join us and just talk about what it's like to work in America's Last Frontier. That's coming up on February 20th at 8 o'clock Eastern, 4 p.m. Alaska time, if you're curious. And I wouldn't be doing my job as a recruiter if I didn't throw in a quick promo for the Gray Talent Pool. If you would love to join us and do some investigative work and, you know, have more training to figure out how to strengthen your story pitches as part of Gray Media, we would love to have you. We are hiring and we are looking for people to join us in this great adventure in this industry. So if you click on that QR code, it's going to take you to grayishiring.com, the same website you would have used to register for tonight's event. And you can upload your real resume, tell us what you'd like to do, where you'd like to do it, when you're available to work. And we can connect with you on the recruiting team to connect you with one of our stations in Gray Media. Again, thank you so much to everybody joining us tonight. Jamie, thank you again for joining us and for all the work you do.
Yes, this was fun. Thank you for all the participants in the chat. Sorry we didn't get to everybody's ideas in there, but thank you for participating. And it was good to see so many people here from coast to coast.
Yeah, wonderful. Stay warm out there, everybody, whether you have snow and cold or not. And we hope to see you for our next event next month. Have a good night.